gone into a studio in Portland, Oregon, in the early 70s, and recorded an album with my acoustic bass. Actually, it wasn't an album, it's just I wanted to put some material down, and I recorded an album's worth of material on my acoustic bass. And I just went in, recorded it, and left. And everything was a first take. It took about 50 minutes to do this project. Shortly after that, I went to Japan, and while I was in Tokyo, Niels Winther's wife was there. I forget which studio I saw her at, but she introduced herself and we talked. And I told her, oh, I have this CD, this album. There were no CDs then, just albums. I says, I have this recording I did. Do you think you folks might be interested in putting it out? She listened to it and she loved it, and she took it back to Denmark, where Steeplechase Records is headquartered, and told Niels Winther, her husband, about it. He listened, he loved it. So that was a project called Years Through Time by myself, just solo bass. When I was in New York a few years later, Niels called me and asked me if I wanted to be part of a session that he was doing with pianist Duke Jordan, trumpet player Art Farmer, and Philly Joe Jones. I says, great. So we went to New York into a studio. I forget the name of the studio, but I do remember there were about 25 to 30 Japanese photographers in the studio. So as we were playing our music, they were certainly quiet, but as soon as we finished, you'd hear the click of their cameras, and they're just huge jazz fans and journalists that wanted to capture the moment. There were 2 CDs that came out of that project. Actually 2 albums, because at the time there were no CDs. But there were 2 albums that came out of that project. One was called Duke's Artistry, with Art Farmer on trumpet, Philly Joe Jones on drums, myself on bass, Duke Jordan on the piano. Then there was another project we did in the same studio, same time frame, called The Great Session, and that was with Duke Jordan, Philly Joe Jones, and myself. It's kind of a funny incident that happened. Philly Joe and I had never played together before, and he's, obviously one of the great jazz drummers of our time, one of the legends. We went to have lunch, and Philly Joe turned to me. He says, "David," he says, he says, "I love what you're doing." He says, "But I hear that you like to play on top of the beat." I says, "Yes, that's my nature." He says, "Well," he says, "I was there first," which meant I was the laid back, just left of center a little bit, and let him have the forward part of the beat. So it was great. It was a great time. And then a couple of years later, I was in Europe, and he wanted to set up a date with Kenny Drew Sr., and myself, and Clifford Jarvis, drummer Clifford Jarvis. And when Kenny Drew first called me for the date, I said, "Well, listen, you and Nels Henning and Ørsted Peterson have a thing. You've made many records together." He says, "Yes, but I just wanted to try something different, to get a different sound." And so I made this record CD with Kenny Drew. It was his date. It was called Ruby, Ruby, My Dear, and it's on Steeplechase. It actually turned out really well. I enjoy all these projects. It was all great for me to play with these great musicians, and I have a saying: listening is my life preserver in the ocean of sound. Without it, I drown. In other words, I can't just think about other things and think I have all this talent and I can just play anything. No, I've got to listen closely and learn to stay in the moment 100% of the time. That's what works for me. It's all been a great experience. It's all been wonderful.